The Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell story. Murder in God's name. In a quiet corner of Idaho, where fog rolls over the fields and the world seems untouched by time, two people believed they had been chosen by God. Lori Vallow, a mother devoted to her faith, convinced she could hear the voice of heaven. Chad Daybell, a writer of prophecies, a man who claimed to walk between the living and the dead. Together, they preached light and salvation. But behind the smiles, their faith was turning into fire. Those who loved them began to vanish. A husband, a wife, two innocent children, each disappearance wrapped in scripture, every lie dressed as revelation. To the outside world, they were the Doomsday couple. But inside their story lies something far more terrifying than any prophecy: the quiet unraveling of a mother's mind and the children who paid the price. This is not just a story of faith, it's a story of obsession, of control, and of how two people mistook destruction for salvation. And in the end, the only thing they proved was how easily belief can become the weapon that kills. In the sun-washed suburbs of Arizona, long before the headlines, Lori Vallow was the kind of woman people described as radiant. Neighbors saw her at church every Sunday, smiling, dressed in soft pastels, her children always beside her. She talked about God, family, and light. To everyone who met her, Lori was the picture of faith. But faith, when it turns inward, can burn like fire. She had grown up in a devout Mormon family, where obedience and optimism were the pillars of life. As a teenager, Lori was drawn to stories of angels and visions, anything that hinted at a world beyond the ordinary. She believed she could feel divine guidance, a whisper just behind the noise of everyday life. When she married Charles Vallow, she seemed to have everything: a stable husband, a beautiful home, and two children she adored: Tylee Ryan from a previous marriage, and Joshua J.J. Vallow, their adopted son, a bright little boy on the autism spectrum. Photos from those years showed barbecues, school plays, matching Christmas pajamas. To outsiders, they were a family drenched in light. But even then, Lori's spiritual hunger was growing. She devoured religious podcasts and end-times literature, convinced that God had chosen her for something greater. She would tell friends, half joking, half serious, "When the world ends, I'll be one of the ones who survive." They laughed. No one realized she meant it. Her husband noticed small changes first: the long nights spent reading scripture, the circles under her eyes, the quiet obsession that seemed to bloom behind her smile. She started using words like translated beings, people so righteous they could no longer die. She talked about angels giving her assignments, and when she met an author named Chad Daybell, she told her friends it felt like destiny. Chad lived hundreds of miles away in Rexburg, Idaho, a soft-spoken gravedigger turned doomsday novelist. He wrote books about near-death experiences and visions of the afterlife, stories filled with angels, portals, and the final gathering of the elect. To Lori, his words felt like confirmation of everything she already believed. Their first meeting was at a religious conference. Witnesses would later remember the spark, how they spoke for hours as if they'd known each other for lifetimes. He told her she was special, one of the 144,000 chosen to survive the world's cleansing fire. And she believed him. In the weeks that followed, their messages turned intimate, almost hypnotic. They talked about past lives, ancient missions, and how their spirits had been married in previous worlds. Chad called her "my goddess," and Lori began referring to him as "my eternal companion." When Charles discovered the messages, he was terrified. His wife wasn't just having an affair. she was slipping into a new reality, a world where death was deliverance and prophecy justified anything. He tried to intervene. He begged church leaders for help. He told police his wife believed she was preparing for the end of the world. But no one listened. Lori's charm, her confidence, made every warning sound like paranoia. At home, Charles would watch her pacing at night, whispering prayers he didn't recognize. Sometimes she'd stop and stare at him, her eyes distant. One evening, she said softly, "You're not Charles anymore. You've been taken over by a dark spirit." That was the moment he realized he couldn't save her. What he didn't know was that Lori was already rewriting her world, drawing lines between light and dark, good and evil, saved and condemned. And soon, those she loved most would fall on the wrong side of that line. In the months after that first meeting, Lori Vallow's world began to revolve around one man, Chad Daybell. To the outside world, Chad was a soft-spoken, middle-aged father of 5. He lived quietly with his wife Tammy in rural Idaho, tending to their garden, publishing small religious books, and serving in his local church. But in his writing, he described a very different world, one filled with spirits, visions, and prophecies of an approaching apocalypse. He wrote that the veil between life and death was thinning, that chosen souls could walk between worlds, and that when the final judgment came, only the righteous would survive. Lori read every word. She told her friends she and Chad had known each other in past lives, that God had brought them together again to finish a divine mission. They began speaking every day, exchanging long, cryptic messages about light and dark, missions and assignments. To Chad, the world was a battlefield between spirits, and he had a system for classifying every soul he met. He said some people carried light, while others were possessed by dark spirits, or what he sometimes called zombies. Once a person's spirit had turned dark, he said, they were already dead. Their body was just a shell. Lori believed it completely. She started making lists, assigning light or dark ratings to friends, relatives, even her own children. At the top of every list was Chad, marked as exalted, and near the bottom were names that would soon be gone. Her brother, Alex Cox, was one of the few people who seemed to understand her new world. Alex had always been fiercely loyal to Lori. He called her his mission partner, and when she told him someone was dark, he didn't question it. He once told a friend, "If my sister says they're evil, they're gone." Meanwhile, Charles Vallow, still desperate to save his marriage, watched the woman he loved vanish before his eyes. He tried everything: therapy, intervention, even filing police reports. He told officers, "She's gone crazy. She thinks I'm not me." But when police arrived, Lori smiled her radiant smile and told them Charles was the one having a breakdown. The charm that once made her loved now made her untouchable. Everyone believed her. By the summer of 2019, Charles was terrified. He told friends he feared for his life. In one email, he wrote, "If anything happens to me, it will be Lori and her brother, Alex." A few weeks later, his prediction came true. On the morning of July 11th, 2019, police were called to Lori's rental home in Chandler, Arizona. Charles Vallow was dead, shot twice in the chest by Alex Cox. Alex claimed Charles had attacked him with a baseball bat. He said it was self-defense. Lori told police she was in another room when it happened, but witnesses remembered something strange. They said Lori's demeanor was calm, almost cheerful. She left the house with her children, went to Burger King, and later that day, hosted a pool party at a friend's home. Photos from that afternoon show her in sunglasses, smiling beside the water. Her husband's body was still at the morgue. To investigators, it was unsettling. To Lori, it was destiny. She told a friend that Charles's spirit had already left, that he was one of the Dark Ones, and his death was God's will. In Idaho, Chad Daybell offered her comfort, or something that looked like it. He told her their mission was nearly complete, that soon the world would be cleansed, and they would lead the 144,000 chosen souls into the next life. He said they would live forever, that no pain, no death could touch them again. They called themselves translated beings, untouchable, immortal. Together, they began to build a new reality, one where every obstacle, every death was part of a sacred plan. And for the people around them, that plan was just beginning. By the end of that summer, the line between faith and delusion had disappeared. Lori Vallow spoke with the certainty of a prophet. She told her friends that angels were guiding her every move, that she could see into the spirit world, that she knew who was meant to live and who was meant to die. Those around her started to vanish. After Charles's death, Lori packed up her things and left Arizona. She said she needed a fresh start, a place of light. Her brother Alex followed her, as always. And together, they drove north to Idaho, where Chad Daybell was waiting. In the quiet town of Rexburg, Lori rented a townhouse just a few miles from Chad's home. To the neighbors, she was polite, calm, friendly. She told them she was a widow, raising her teenage daughter Tylee and her young son JJ. No one knew that behind the closed doors of that townhouse, she and Chad were preparing for the end of the world. They met in secret, holding small gatherings with other believers. They talked about portals and missions, about cleansing the earth of darkness, and they began making lists, again, of those they believed had been taken over by dark spirits. At first, the names were strangers, then they were family. Tylee, JJ, Tammy. In Idaho, Chad's wife, Tammy Daybell, had started to notice the change in her husband. He spent hours texting Lori, claiming he was receiving revelations from beyond the veil. He told Tammy he was communicating with angels. She laughed it off until she found Lori's name in his messages. Tammy told her friends she felt something was wrong, that her husband was distant, distracted, living in another world. And then, one night in October 2019, she came home from work, lay down in bed, and never woke up. Chad said she died peacefully in her sleep. Within hours, her body was buried. There was no autopsy, no questions. The obituary described her as a beloved mother and teacher, a woman full of life, gone without explanation. Lori sent Chad a message. "You did it, baby. Now we can be together." 17 days later, they were married, barefoot on a beach in Hawaii. White sand, blue water, matching smiles. The photos showed nothing but joy. No mention of Tammy, no mention of the children who hadn't been seen in weeks. Back in Idaho, people were starting to ask questions. Friends called, relatives worried, police knocked. Lori had an answer for everyone. The kids are fine. They're safe. But she never said where they were. Her eldest son, Colby Ryan, grew desperate. He hadn't heard from his sister or his little brother in months. Every text he sent went unanswered. When he finally reached his mother, her tone was cold, detached. "Don't worry, Colby," she said. "Everything's under control." But everything was falling apart. By late November, the Rexburg Police Department and the FBI had opened a full investigation. They issued a request: produce the children within 5 days. Lori ignored it. Instead, she and Chad packed their bags and boarded a plane back to Hawaii. The next time the world saw her, she was walking along a beach, holding Chad's hand, wearing a lei around her neck. Reporters shouted questions as she passed. "Where are your children?" Lori just smiled. "They're happy and safe," she said, but no one believed her anymore. In Arizona, Alex Cox, the loyal brother who had stood beside her through everything, was also dead. Collapsed suddenly in his bathroom. Another mysterious natural cause. 3 deaths, 2 missing children, and a trail of unanswered prayers. The world was starting to see a pattern. The faithful were dying. The chosen were running. And somewhere, beneath the cold Idaho soil, the truth was waiting to be found. By the winter of 2019, the story of JJ and Tylee had become a national obsession. 2 children, a vanished mother, a stepfather preaching the end of the world. Police in Rexburg, Idaho, had been trying for months to track the family's movements. They discovered that JJ had been withdrawn from school that September. His teacher remembered Lori's calm voice over the phone. "We're going to homeschool him," she'd said. And then, nothing. There were no medical records, no photos, no signs of life after that call. For Tylee, the last verified sighting was at Yellowstone National Park on September 8th, captured in a family photo with her brother and her uncle Alex. After that, she simply disappeared. Detectives began piecing together timelines. Phone pings, bank statements, storage unit visits. Lori had been renting a small locker filled with children's belongings, JJ's toys, Tylee's photo albums, their school projects. Each item carefully packed away, as if their lives had already ended. When officers questioned her in November, Lori was unfazed. She smiled through every question. She said the kids were somewhere safe. When asked for proof, she refused to answer. Then she was gone. By the time authorities issued a missing persons alert, Lori and Chad were already in Kauai, Hawaii, living in a resort condominium under the sun. She wore white dresses and flower leis. He wore sunglasses and linen shirts. They walked hand in hand along the beach while news anchors debated whether they were murderers or delusional prophets. When reporters finally found them, cameras rolled. A journalist shouted, "Lori, where are your children?" She paused for a moment, her smile frozen. "They're happy," she said softly. "They're fine." Then she walked away. The clip went viral. Millions watched, horrified, as the woman once described as a loving mother smiled her way through the question every parent dreads. But behind that smile lay a trail of lies, missing children, and an obsession with the end of days. What really happened to JJ and Tylee? The answers would soon emerge, buried deep in a backyard, and deeper still in the minds of those who believed they were chosen. Part 2, The Backyard Graves, coming soon on True Echoes. To be continued. Every secret waits to be revealed. Every silence that carries an echo. Every story is waiting to be told. What about yours? What do you think about this case? Share your thoughts in the comments. Every voice matters. Subscribe and step into the echoes of truth.